My name is Isabel Quinn. I'm 36 years old, and I live alone in a restored townhouse on the edge of Charleston's historic district. The streets outside are lined with cobblestones and moss-covered oak trees, and on quiet mornings, I can still hear the seagulls calling from the harbor. I work as a preservation specialist, helping restore old homes and buildings, breathing life back into what the city forgot. I guess you could say I've always been drawn to things that are crumbling, trying to hold them together before they disappear completely. Most days I find peace in the silence of old walls, but not always. Some ghosts refuse to be quiet. 5 years ago, my grandfather, Frederick Quinn, vanished. He wasn't just my grandfather, he was the heart of our family, the founder of Quinn and Sons, a firm that had spent 4 decades preserving historic architecture across the Southeast. He was a legend in Charleston. Every brick we saved, every church roof we reinforced, bore the mark of his passion. He was respected, loved, and to me, invincible. Then he went missing. They said it was an accident. He was on a project in New Orleans inspecting a crumbling 18th century cathedral. My father, Victor, and my older brother, Nathan, had accompanied him. According to them, Grandpa wandered off into the rear grounds during the final inspection, slipped on unstable scaffolding, and fell into a canal behind the building. No one saw him fall. No security footage. No workers nearby. No body was ever recovered. Just his satchel and a muddy scarf found floating near the reeds. The local police ruled it as a tragic accident. An unsolvable mystery. The city mourned. Our family fractured. What came next was a whirlwind. Within 2 weeks, my father took over Quinn and Sons. He renamed it Quinn Legacy Holdings. My brother Nathan became chief operating officer. The company, once devoted to conservation, shifted toward commercial real estate, converting old churches into luxury condos, turning once protected historic homes into high-end rentals. My grandfather's name vanished from the company website. His portraits were removed from the office walls. And I left. I couldn't watch it happen. The company my grandfather built with sweat and love was being stripped of its soul. I resigned the day they signed a deal to demolish a 19th century library for a private hotel. I remember the meeting like it happened yesterday. My father stood at the head of the table smiling as he signed the final paperwork. "This is the future," he said. "Sentiment has no place in real estate." I walked out without a word. I haven't stepped into the company building since. I started over. I began working independently, quietly, helping small families preserve their crumbling homes. Sometimes I feel like I've been piecing together broken foundations in houses just to distract myself from the one in my own heart. My mother, Helen, still lives in the family estate, though I only visit her from time to time. After Grandpa's disappearance, she became quieter, thinner, like grief was eating her from the inside. She doesn't say much about Victor anymore. She never confronted him, never asked the questions that kept me up at night. But she once whispered to me over tea, "Your grandfather wouldn't just vanish, Isabel. He wouldn't leave me." That was the first time I saw her cry in years. I still think of that moment. I think of how my grandfather used to sit with me on the back porch sketching buildings from memory and telling me stories of the old Charleston churches he restored. I think of how he called me his compass, how he believed I had the heart to continue what he started. Then I remember how fast everything disappeared. I've spent 5 years convincing myself to move on, but I never truly believed my grandfather was gone. Not really. He was too sharp, too careful. A man like him doesn't slip quietly into the dark. And lately something's been pulling at me, a pressure in my chest I can't explain, as if something is about to rise from the past, something I'm not ready for. Then the invitation came, a cream-colored envelope delivered by hand to my doorstep. "You are cordially invited to the Quinn Family Gala, commemorating 5 years of growth and vision, November 11th, Quinn Legacy Holdings headquarters." I stared at the words until they blurred. 5 years. 5 years since my grandfather disappeared. 5 years since my father and brother took over. Now they wanted to celebrate it, as if nothing ever happened, as if he never existed. That night I sat at my desk holding the envelope, listening to the wind rattle the shutters outside. Something was wrong. I didn't know what yet, But deep in my bones, I felt it, and I knew one thing for certain. I would be attending that gala, no matter what. It happened on a cold January morning in New Orleans 5 years ago. I remember the date clearly, January 12th, because I had been planning to fly down that weekend to surprise Grandpa. He had been thrilled about the cathedral restoration. It was one of the last untouched French colonial structures in the quarter, and he believed preserving it was a moral duty, not just a job. He had taken my father and Nathan with him. At the time, I thought it was strange. Victor and Grandpa didn't share the same vision for architecture. My father was about profit margins and modernity. Grandpa believed in integrity and preserving the soul of a place. I never understood why he insisted they go. Maybe he wanted to build a bridge repair whatever rift had grown between them. But he never came back. According to the story they told, Grandpa had gone out alone to inspect the cathedral's rear buttresses. There was no safety crew present at that time. Nathan claimed he had gone to make a call and returned to find only Grandpa's scarf and bag. Police divers searched the canal behind the structure for days. Drones combed the nearby marshlands. Dogs were brought in. They found nothing. The scarf was clean, barely wet, and still smelled faintly of the tobacco Grandpa used in his pipe. That detail haunted me. If he had fallen into the water, the scarf should have been soaked ruined, but it was neatly folded on the embankment as if placed there. I flew down the moment I heard. My mother called me, voice trembling, and said, "Isabel, your grandfather, something's happened." I dropped everything and went to New Orleans. I arrived just in time for the final day of the search. My father met me at the site. He looked tired, but eerily calm. He held a thermos of coffee and offered it to me without a word. His eyes didn't look like they'd been crying. Nathan stood nearby, arms crossed, giving interviews to local reporters. He said all the right things. He was a visionary. We're devastated. We'll continue his legacy. But there was a rehearsed quality to his words. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something about the way he avoided my gaze told me he was hiding something. Back at the hotel that night, I confronted my father. We sat in the suite's small kitchen. The light above us flickered slightly. I asked him, "What really happened? Dad, don't give me the press version." He didn't blink. He slipped. "Isabel, he's gone. I know it's hard, but we have to move on." I leaned forward. "And what about the scarf?" "His satchel." Both were left behind almost too neatly. He took a sip of coffee, then looked at me like I was a child asking why the sky was blue. Accidents aren't always tidy, but they happen. We need to stop chasing ghosts. I remember the way he said it. Cold. Final. Like he was closing a door he never planned to open again. The following week, Grandpa was declared legally dead. A private ceremony was held back in Charleston, but I didn't attend. I couldn't. I stood outside the gates of the Quinn family estate in my car, watching the black sedans arrive, and I knew that something inside me had changed. 3 weeks later, Quinn and Sons became Quinn Legacy Holdings. It happened fast. My father called an emergency board meeting, citing leadership transition. The company bylaws gave him temporary authority as next of kin. But what shocked me was how quickly the board folded. Most of them had worked under my grandfather for decades. Some even owed their careers to him. And yet they nodded along, perhaps afraid of what would happen if they didn't. Victor moved swiftly. He began selling off smaller restoration contracts and shifting the firm's focus toward redevelopment. Adaptive reuse, he called it. But it wasn't adaptation, it was demolition. He razed a historic textile mill and replaced it with an upscale hotel. He shuttered 2 museum preservation partnerships and pulled funding from the city's Heritage Grant Initiative. Nathan became his mouthpiece, dressed sharp in tailored suits, speaking in boardrooms with smooth charisma. "The future of architecture is fusion," he once said in a press release. History must evolve. I remember reading that and feeling sick. My mother seemed to disappear into herself during this time. She stopped painting. The sunroom she once used as a studio filled with dust. I'd call her, and sometimes she wouldn't answer. When she did, her voice was thin, distracted. She defended Victor at first. "He's grieving in his own way," she'd say, but I could tell something in her was unraveling. One evening I came to visit and found her sitting in the garden staring at a half-dead magnolia tree. He planted this when I was born, she whispered. Your grandfather. He said it would always bloom before I lost hope. It hadn't bloomed since he disappeared. My breaking point came when Victor announced the company was bidding on a public lot that held a former orphanage, a red brick relic from the Civil War. I had spent 2 years fighting to preserve it with a group of volunteers. We had raised funding for its restoration. Then Victor swooped in, used his connections to override the city's zoning protections, and had the building demolished within a month. Nathan cut the ribbon on the new Quinn Plaza in front of a crowd of reporters, while I stood across the street with tears in my eyes. That night I resigned from the board. I sent an email with 2 lines. This is not what Grandpa would have wanted. I won't be part of this. I moved out of the family estate. I found a small townhouse near the Battery. I started over, taking on projects too small for the big firms. I repaired porches. I relaid brick pathways. I scraped lead paint from old shutters. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. It felt honest. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, deeply wrong. Every time I looked at Victor and Nathan in the media, smiling, celebrating, expanding, I saw ghosts behind their eyes. My grandfather's voice echoed in my mind. Buildings tell the truth, even if people try to silence it. For 5 years, I tried to forget, until that letter came, and everything I had buried began to rise again. The invitation to the family gala sat on my desk for 3 days before I touched it again. I couldn't stop staring at it. I flipped it over, checked the envelope for any personal note, any hint. There was nothing, just gold cursive lettering, embossed paper, and the unsettling phrase, celebrating 5 years of legacy. Legacy. That word felt like poison in my mouth. I didn't want to go, but something inside me, some whisper I couldn't ignore, told me I had to. My grandfather always said, when something doesn't feel right, Isabel, dig. Because the truth doesn't hide, it waits. And I had been waiting too long. I began by reopening old files from the New Orleans trip, the official accident report, the company's internal statements, and a few articles from local papers that had followed the case briefly. I hadn't looked at them in years, but now everything felt different, sharper, off. The police report claimed Grandpa had been alone when he fell. Yet in Nathan's interview with the Charleston Post shortly after, he mentioned they had all been walking the site together, and he turned around and Grandpa was gone. That discrepancy hadn't bothered me then. It did now. Then there was the time. The incident was reported to emergency services at 3:42 p.m. The report showed the call came from Victor's phone. But in a local New Orleans article, a worker mentioned seeing Victor leaving the site around 3:00 looking agitated. Why the delay? I started building a timeline. I reviewed archived emails from my time at Quinn & Sons. Most were standard memos, updates on project staff reviews, but buried in the thread of emails around the New Orleans trip, I found one from Victor's assistant, dated 4 days before Grandpa's disappearance. Subject: revised ownership protocols. Per your request, the document outlining the transition of control in the event of Mr. Frederick Quinn's incapacitation has been finalized. Please review the clause on succession authority. I read the sentence 3 times. My breath caught. 4 days before Grandpa vanished, Victor was revising succession plans. Why, I tried to contact the assistant, but her work email bounced. A search showed she'd resigned shortly after Grandpa's disappearance and moved out of state. No forwarding address. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by papers, legal documents, and printouts. I looked at the photos I had of Grandpa, him smiling in front of the old Charleston bank building he'd restored, him holding up blueprints with ink smudges on his sleeves. My chest ached. For years, I had tried to believe he died by accident. But the more I looked, the more I saw the cracks. My mother called me the next morning. Her voice was frail. I got one too, she said quietly. An invitation. I hesitated. Are you going? She was silent for a moment. I think I need to. For closure. Maybe I'll feel him there somehow. We sat in silence. Then she said something that caught me completely off guard. Isabel, do you ever wonder if he's still alive? I blinked. What? I don't know. I've had dreams lately. He's calling out to me standing in that old church. I hear his voice so clearly it wakes me up. Maybe it's just grief, but her voice trailed off. I didn't answer. Because I'd had those dreams too. 2 nights later, something strange happened. It was past 10 p.m. I was going over the architectural report from the cathedral project, the last one Grandpa worked on. I had managed to get it from a contact in the preservation community. It was mostly technical, but one page had a note scribbled in the margin: rear access compromised. Unsafe ledge. Must speak to Victor. The handwriting was Grandpa's, but the report had been filed the morning after he disappeared. I stared at the date. January 13th. That couldn't be possible. Unless he never filed it. Unless someone found his notes after the fact and submitted it on his behalf. Or worse, someone wanted it to look like the accident had been caused by the site's conditions. I looked closer at the handwriting. It didn't match. It was similar, but off. The curve of the R, the slant of the V were just slightly wrong. Someone had forged it. My hands trembled. I picked up the phone and called the preservation board that had commissioned the report. I asked who submitted the final version. After some hold time, the receptionist gave me the answer. The report was submitted by Mr. Nathan Quinn, she said. I didn't speak for a moment. Are you sure? I asked. Yes, ma'am. I have the submission form right here. I hung up and stared at the wall. Nathan submitted the final report. Nathan forged Grandpa's handwriting. The conclusion was no longer a shadow. It was standing right in front of me, bold and awful. My grandfather didn't fall. He didn't vanish. He was taken out of the way. And my father and brother made sure no one would ever ask questions. Until now. It was raining when it happened. Not the kind of storm that rattles windows or floods the street, but the soft, steady kind that blankets the world in gray. I was sitting at my desk, a stack of files spread around me like the remains of some unsolved mystery. My apartment was quiet, save for the ticking of the old brass clock my grandfather had given me when I turned 25. Tick, tick. Then the knock. It was sharp, measured. Not the kind of knock from a delivery driver or a neighbor with a package. It echoed once, then again. I froze. The clock stopped ticking in my head. Something about the sound tugged at me. My heart skipped. I walked slowly to the door. I peered through the peephole. A man stood on the other side, hooded, soaked from the rain. His face was angled downward. He wasn't moving, just standing there. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the knob. A voice inside me screamed to turn the lock to call someone. But another part, the one that had been restless for 5 years, whispered, "Open it." So I did. He looked up. I dropped the handle. I couldn't breathe. He looked older, thinner. His face was more weathered, his eyes heavier. But there was no mistaking the silver-white hair, the high cheekbones, the sharp gaze that used to measure light angles and roof lines with nothing but instinct. It was him. It was Frederick Quinn. "Hi, sweetheart," he said, voice hoarse, eyes glassy. "May I come in?" I stepped aside without a word. My legs moved before my brain could process it. He walked into the living room, slowly leaning on a wooden cane. He smelled faintly of cedar and earth. I shut the door and turned to him. "You're—" My voice broke. "I'm alive," he said, nodding. "Barely, but I am." I stared at him, afraid that if I blinked, he'd vanish again. "How—" He sat in my armchair, removing his hood and brushing his damp hair back. "It's a long story. One I never wanted to tell. But I've run out of time, and you're the only one I trust." I knelt in front of him. My hands trembled. "I thought you were dead." "I was supposed to be." He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a small rusted ring, the signet ring he always wore. He placed it in my palm. I kept this to remind myself who I was. Tears flooded my eyes. "Tell me everything," I whispered. He leaned back, eyes darkening. "It started in New Orleans. I knew something was wrong even before we arrived. Your father was different, colder than usual." Nathan barely made eye contact. I had my suspicions, but I didn't think they would act on them. Not like this. He paused. Rain tapped against the windows in rhythm. We arrived early that morning. I asked to walk the rear grounds alone. I wanted time to think. They insisted on coming. I said fine. We reached the edge of the old structure where the canal bent sharply near the retaining wall. I knelt to examine the soil it had been eroding from the recent storm. And when I stood, I felt a sharp shove to my back. My stomach turned. I fell, he said simply. It wasn't a long fall, maybe 10 feet into the marsh. I hit my head. I blacked out. When I came to, it was dark. I was bleeding, disoriented. I couldn't walk. But someone found me, who I asked, barely able to speak. A man named Elijah Rowe, a groundskeeper who lived in a cabin nearby. He saw me fall, or rather saw what happened after. He didn't come forward, said he didn't trust the police, didn't trust anyone. But he pulled me out, kept me hidden, treated my wounds. He thought I was safer that way. My voice cracked. Why didn't you come home? He looked down. I couldn't. Not until I had proof. Not until I understood why they did it. Victor, he always wanted the company, but I never thought he would resort to this. And Nathan, my own grandson, he helped him. He looked at me with eyes full of pain. I couldn't face you. Not until I had something more than my word. He opened a leather folder and handed me a USB drive. I've spent the last 5 years gathering evidence, emails, voice memos, transactions. I have recordings of Nathan talking to investors about pushing me out days before the trip. I have documents proving Victor moved company assets offshore before I was even declared dead. I took the drive in my hands. It felt heavier than it should have. But why now, I asked. Why come back this week? He looked at me, his eyes steady. Because they're planning something bigger. The gala isn't just a celebration. It's the launch of a full public offering. They want to take Quinn Holdings global. And when they do, every last piece of what I built will be lost. My name, my values, everything. I stared at the USB. You want to stop them? I can't do it alone, he said softly. But I can do it with you. I shook my head, overwhelmed. I left all of that behind. He reached out his hand, covering mine. You have your mother's heart, but you have my strength. You're the only one who can stand between them and the future they're trying to steal. I sat back, my mind racing. I thought of the gala, the faces that would be there, the speeches, the smug applause, and then I imagined the room falling silent when the man they buried walked in. Does Mom know? I asked. He hesitated. She doesn't. Not yet. I wanted to tell you first. I nodded. We have to tell her. He looked surprised. Are you sure she deserves to know? She never stopped waiting for you. He nodded slowly. Then let's tell her together. 2 nights later, I drove my mother to a small cottage on the outskirts of town. I told her I had something important to show her. She looked tired, her eyes distant, but she trusted me. We stepped inside. And there he was. She froze. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Her hands went to her chest. Frederick, she whispered, as if saying his name might break the spell. He stepped forward. Clara, he said. It's me. She crumbled into his arms. Tears spilled down both their faces as they held each other in silence. Years of pain, confusion, and loneliness poured out without a single word. I stood back watching them, my own heart breaking and mending at the same time. Later, as we sat together around the fire, my mother asked the question we had both been carrying. What happens now? Grandpa looked at me, then back at her. We go to the gala, he said, and we tell the world the truth. In the days that followed, the 3 of us, my grandfather, my mother, and I began to prepare. The cabin where Grandpa had been staying became our war room. The space was simple, a wood stove in the corner, a worn rug underfoot, and a long oak table that quickly filled with documents, photos, and notes. At night, we drank coffee instead of sleeping, our minds racing through timelines, evidence, legal strategy. Grandpa had kept meticulous records over the last 5 years. He showed me binders filled with printed email spreadsheets, with financial transfers, and notes on meetings Nathan and Victor had attended behind closed doors. Some of the most damning materials came from 2 former employees who had quietly helped Grandpa gather intel from within Quinn Holdings. There's enough here to bury them, I said one night, flipping through a folder labeled Canal Project, Internal Memos. Only if we deliver it the right way, Grandpa replied. We need to time this perfectly. The gala is more than a party. It's a spectacle. They'll use it to announce their global expansion and IPO filing that would legally transfer full authority to Nathan. If we wait too long, the company becomes unreachable. He paused. And once it's public, they'll be untouchable. We made a plan. Grandpa would reveal himself at the gala, but not immediately. The legal team he'd been working with, 3 lawyers he trusted from his earliest days in the preservation movement, would be waiting nearby with everything prepared. A press release, formal documentation of his survival and criminal complaints, ready to be filed with the district attorney. My role was to coordinate the presentation. We would project key evidence, a timeline of emails, audio clips from recorded calls between Victor and Nathan financial records, showing embezzlement and a copy of the forged cathedral report. The final blow would be a voice recording Nathan had unknowingly made during a meeting with a foreign investor, saying Frederick was a relic. We had to move on. We couldn't wait for nature to take its course. It wasn't a confession, but in the context of everything else, it would be enough. While Grandpa focused on organizing the legal materials, I turned to my mother. She had grown quieter since the night we reunited with Grandpa, but not weaker. Her eyes no longer drifted in silence. Her steps were slower, but more certain. She was changing, reclaiming the fire she had once buried beneath years of loyalty and grief. One afternoon, we sat on the porch of the cabin while Grandpa met with the legal team inside. "Are you ready for this?" I asked her gently. She looked at me. "I'm not sure." She paused, then added, "But I know I can't stay silent." I stayed silent for too long. She turned her gaze to the mountains in the distance. "Do you remember the stained glass window at St. Agnes Chapelle?" she asked. I nodded. "You were 6. Your grandfather had just restored it. You asked why he spent so much time on something no one could even touch. He said, 'Because some things don't have to be useful to be worth saving.'" Her voice cracked slightly. He believed in beauty, in truth. That's why this matters. That evening, I received a call from the gala's event coordinator confirming my RSVP. She mentioned Victor had requested all family members be seated at the main table. A symbolic gesture, she called it. He wants to show unity. I forced a polite smile through the phone, then hung up. Unity. The word echoed like a cruel joke. We spent the final day rehearsing. I created a slideshow to accompany the evidence. Clean, simple, undeniable. Each slide would align with the audio clips each document annotated. My mother insisted on reviewing every word. "If we do this, we do it with clarity," she said. "No shouting, no drama, just facts." I nodded. That night, we gathered in the living room, the 3 of us facing the fire. Grandpa sipped tea. My mother sat beside him. I leaned against the hearth watching the flames. "This might not go the way we want," I said quietly. "They have money, lawyers, influence. We might be ignored." Grandpa looked at me. Maybe he said, "But truth has a way of echoing." He tapped his chest. "And I'm not afraid anymore." I looked at both of them, feeling something shift inside me. A sense of weight, yes, but also clarity. For years, I had felt like a broken link in a proud family. But now I knew. I wasn't the weak one. I was the bridge between what was and what must be. When I left the cabin that night, I took a final copy of the USB drive, a binder of backup files, and my grandfather's ring returned to him when he reappeared, but now handed back to me. He placed it in my hand and said, "Wear it, Isabel. That name still means something." I slipped it on. It fit perfectly. The night of the gala arrived with unsettling calm. Charleston's skyline shimmered with the last light of evening as I pulled into the circular drive of the Quinn Legacy headquarters. The building stood tall and modern, a far cry from the charming preservation office my grandfather once designed in the French Quarter style. Now glass and steel replaced wood and brick. Even the bronze plaque outside had been changed Quinn Legacy Holdings, building the future. I stepped out of the car dressed in a navy gown my mother had helped me pick out. Around me, cameras flashed. Media vans lined the curb, reporters murmured into microphones. I hadn't realized how public this event would be. But of course, it wasn't about family. It was about image. Inside the lobby had been transformed. Chandeliers dripped light across marble floors. A jazz trio played softly near the entrance to the main banquet hall. Waiters carried trays of champagne and crab cakes. Guests in black tie attire sipped cocktails and greeted one another like old friends. It smelled like power and polished ambition. My mother arrived shortly after. She wore emerald green, the same shade she wore the last time I saw her at a public event, a restoration award ceremony years ago. Her posture was regal, her expression unreadable. I met her at the entrance and gently took her hand. "Are you sure you're ready?" I asked. She nodded. Tonight, I stopped being silent. The plan was simple. We would wait until the final speech, the moment of the IPO announcement, and then make our move. My grandfather remained out of sight, hidden in a private conference room just beyond the east hallway, escorted there by his legal team. I had arranged for the projector and screen to be quietly prepped and synced to my laptop. Everything was ready. We moved through the crowd quietly, taking our designated seats at the long central family table at the front of the room. Victor sat at the head, resplendent in a charcoal tuxedo, raising his glass as guests passed by to congratulate him. He spotted us and stood. "Isabel," he said with a wide smile, kissing my cheek stiffly. "Helen, I wasn't sure you'd come. We wouldn't miss it," I replied. He raised his glass again, then looked down the table. "Nathan's just wrapping up some prep with the media team. He'll be out shortly." "Big night." I nodded, saying nothing. As the crowd settled and the music faded, Victor took the stage. A hush fell over the room. Friends, colleagues, family. He began, his voice warm and full of pride. "Tonight is more than a celebration. It's a landmark. 5 years ago, we faced a great loss. My father-in-law, the great Frederick Quinn, left us suddenly. But from that tragedy, we built something stronger." He gestured around the room. "This company has grown beyond preservation. We've become leaders in transformation of cities, of communities, of the industry itself. And tonight we prepare to take Quinn Holdings global. I am proud to announce that as of next quarter, we will begin the process of an initial public offering." The room erupted in applause. My fingers tightened on the edge of the table. Across from me, my mother's jaw clenched. The lights dimmed slightly as a projection screen lowered behind Victor. And now he continued. "My son Nathan will walk you through our global vision." I stood. "Actually," I said loudly. All eyes turned to me. The microphone in front of Victor picked up the motion, amplifying the sudden silence. "I'd like to introduce someone else first." Confused murmurs rippled across the room. Victor frowned. "Isabel, this isn't the time." "Yes, it is," I said. I turned to the tech crew. "Play the file marked Quinn Truth." The screen behind Victor flickered, then came to life. First an audio clip. Nathan's voice. "He won't survive a fall like that. We do it clean. We say it was an accident. He's old. No one will question it." Gasps rose from the crowd. Another voice. Victor's. "We need this company. He's in the way." "I've waited too long." I could feel the air shift. Guests looked at one another, horrified. Victor's face drained of color. "What is this?" he barked. But I wasn't done. The next slide appeared. A bank transfer record, offshore accounts, then forged architectural reports, then emails between Victor and a zoning official arranging bribes, and then the final image, a live feed from the east hallway. My grandfather. Frederick Quinn stepped slowly into the room, leaning on his cane, his silver-white hair glowing under the lights. For a moment, the world stopped. He walked to the stage, each step deliberate. He reached the podium and faced the crowd. "I am Frederick Quinn," he said, voice calm and resonant. "And I am not dead." The room exploded in chaos. Some guests stood. Some covered their mouths. Camera flashes went wild. Victor staggered backward. "This is a trick," he hissed. "You're not him," Silence Grandpa said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a notarized packet. "I have here documented evidence of a conspiracy to remove me from this company. Attempted murder, embezzlement, and fraud. Tonight, we restore the truth." Suddenly, a second wave of commotion broke as uniformed officers entered the hall. They moved quickly, efficiently. 2 approached Victor. 2 more flanked the doorway, blocking exits. Victor Quinn, the lead officer, said, "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, financial fraud, and obstruction of justice." Nathan appeared at the back of the room, caught mid-step as the officers spotted him. He turned to run. They caught him before he reached the side exit. I couldn't move. I stood frozen watching the two men who once towered over my life led away in handcuffs. My mother began to cry silently beside me. I took her hand. On stage, Grandpa turned back to the room. "This company was built on integrity," he said. "And tonight, that foundation is restored." The room fell into stunned, respectful silence. Victor and Nathan disappeared behind the closing doors. And in that silence, I knew the tide had turned. The days that followed were a whirlwind. The morning after the gala, Charleston woke up to headlines in bold black ink: Frederick Quinn returns from the dead, father and son, behind attempted murder, plot to seize company. Quinn, legacy crumbles as truth surfaces. National outlets picked up the story within hours. News vans lined up outside the Quinn Holdings headquarters, the family estate, and even the courthouse. Reporters clamored for quotes, for footage of my grandfather's speech, for photos of Victor and Nathan in handcuffs. But we weren't celebrating. Inside the same cabin where we'd planned our counterattack, the mood was quiet. My grandfather stood at the window watching the oak trees sway in the wind. He held a mug of tea, the steam curling into the soft morning light. My mother sat beside me on the worn couch, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "They'll fight this," I said, "with everything they have." "They'll try," Grandpa replied, "but we've already won the part that matters." He turned and looked at me. "The truth is out. What happens next is about accountability." He was right. The evidence we submitted was comprehensive. The USB drive, the printed contracts, the recordings, all of it had been formally turned over to the district attorney's office. The charges against Victor and Nathan included attempted murder, fraud, forgery, obstruction of justice, and financial conspiracy. Because of the company's public status, the SEC had already begun its own investigation. But perhaps the most damning testimony came from Elijah Rowe, the groundskeeper who had pulled my grandfather from the marsh 5 years ago. He came forward voluntarily. In a recorded statement, he confirmed seeing Victor and Nathan at the edge of the cathedral that day, acting suspiciously. He admitted he'd been afraid to speak up, worried no one would believe a quiet man from the edges of town. But when he saw the news, he contacted the legal team immediately. "Your grandfather gave me a chance to do what's right," he said when I met him in person. I owed him that. The case was airtight. Victor and Nathan were denied bail. The prosecution argued that given their wealth and international connections, they were flight risks. Their assets, bank accounts, properties, and investment portfolios were frozen. Lawyers who once lined up to represent them now declined the calls. Their names, once associated with progress and leadership, became synonymous with betrayal and greed. My mother testified before the grand jury. She stood tall in a dark suit, her voice unwavering as she recounted the night my grandfather disappeared and the years she spent being lied to by the man she once loved. "I was silent for too long," she said, "but I won't be silent anymore." The jury indicted both men on all charges. The trial date was set for early spring. Though I was asked repeatedly to speak to the press, I declined every interview. I wasn't ready. I needed time to breathe, to process, to grieve, because as satisfying as it was to see the truth finally exposed, it didn't erase the pain. Victor was still my father, Nathan my brother, and I had lost them long before this. One evening I returned to the family estate for the first time in over 4 years. The house was quiet, echoing with memories. I wandered room to room, noticing the cracks in the walls, the peeling paint, the silence that had settled over the halls. I ended up in the study, the same place where Victor had once signed the document that renamed Quinn and Sons. The nameplate on the desk still read Victor Quinn, chairman. I took it and turned it over. Beneath the plaque was my grandfather's original polished brass worn at the edges. Frederick A. Quinn, founder. I set it back on the desk where it belonged. Outside, the sky began to shift into orange and lavender hues. I walked to the front porch and sat on the wooden swing. My grandfather joined me a few minutes later. "You didn't have to come back here," he said gently. "I needed to," I replied. "It's not just about them. It's about reclaiming what matters." He nodded slowly. "I always hoped you'd be the one." The one to what? To carry it forward. I looked at him unsure. I'm not like you. He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. No, you're not. You're better. You have clarity, compassion, and the strength to walk away when others chase power. He reached into his coat and handed me a single folded document. I've rewritten my will, he said. Everything shares properties, voting rights goes to you. I opened my mouth to protest, but he raised a hand. It's done. You don't have to accept the title, but you've earned the right to choose. I looked down at the paper in my hands. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like responsibility. That night I sat in my apartment staring at my grandfather's signet ring on my finger. I opened a blank notebook and began to write a vision for the future of Quinn and Sons. I wouldn't let this legacy die in corruption. Not on my watch. Weeks passed. The company rebranded, officially shedding the name Quinn Legacy Holdings. We returned to the original Quinn and Sons and quietly updated the logo to include "and Daughters." A subtle correction, a long overdue one. Employees who had been pushed out under Victor's regime were invited back. Preservation contracts were reinstated. Community partnerships restored. Slowly, we began to rebuild trust not just with clients, but with the city itself. The biggest moment came during a town hall meeting with the Preservation Board. I stood before them, nervous, holding my notes. My name is Isabel Quinn, I said. I'm not here to make promises I can't keep, but I'm here to listen, to lead with the values my grandfather built this company on, and to say we're not starting over, we're coming home. The applause was quiet, but real. My grandfather watched from the front row, a hand on my mother's shoulder. And for the first time in years, I felt like something broken inside me had begun to heal. It's strange the way silence feels after a storm. Not empty, just still. Like a room after a long conversation where nothing more needs to be said. That's what life felt like in the months that followed the trial, the truth, and the return of my grandfather. Still, and finally, honest. Victor and Nathan both pled guilty. There was no drawn-out trial. The evidence was too overwhelming, the pressure too great. They accepted a plea deal. Victor received 22 years for conspiracy, attempted murder, and financial fraud. Nathan took 15. Both would serve time in a federal facility. I didn't attend the sentencing. My mother did. She told me later that Victor never once looked up from the table. Nathan glanced around confused, like a boy who still hadn't understood the weight of what he'd done. She said she felt nothing, not rage, not sorrow, just release. He was never the man I believed in, she said softly. And maybe that's what hurts most. But it was also what freed her. She moved out of the estate and into a cottage near my grandfather's cabin, surrounded by wildflowers and pine. She began painting again. Her voice grew stronger. Some days I'd visit and she'd be humming in the kitchen window open to the breeze. She said it felt like being 20 again, only this time she wasn't waiting for someone else's permission to be happy. Grandpa kept to his simple life. He declined every interview, every offer to return to leadership at the company. He said he'd had his turn. "This part is yours, Isabel," he told me. "The next chapter always belongs to the one who survives." And so I stayed, at Quinn and Sons, now Quinn and Daughters. I took the reins slowly. Not as a ruler, but as a restorer. I didn't want to build monuments to power. I wanted to repair what had been broken. Not just buildings, but trust, legacy. One of my first initiatives was something I dreamed of quietly for years, the Clara Foundation, named after my mother. A nonprofit dedicated to helping women who had been manipulated, silenced, or disempowered within families or businesses. It offered legal support, financial counseling, and grants to start fresh. Whether that meant starting over, starting a business, or simply starting to believe in themselves again. The board raised their eyebrows at first. "We're in the business of buildings," Isabel once said. "No," I told them. "We're in the business of preservation. And some things worth preserving are people." No one argued after that. The foundation launched quietly without fanfare. But word spread fast. The first letters arrived a month later, women from across the country sharing their stories, their gratitude. Some sent pictures of their children. Others just wrote, "Thank you for seeing me." I kept those letters in a drawer by my desk. On hard days, I read them. And there were hard days. Rebuilding a legacy is not romantic, it's messy. The damage Victor and Nathan caused wasn't just legal or financial, it was cultural. I sat in rooms with staff who didn't trust me, with communities who doubted our intentions. I listened more than I spoke. I made mistakes. I apologized often. But slowly things changed. One afternoon in early spring, I found myself standing in front of the old library Victor had once tried to demolish. It had been saved at the last minute thanks to a community protest. I decided to personally sponsor its full restoration, not as a business opportunity, but as an apology. We held the reopening on the library lawn. No stage, no champagne, just folding chairs, sunlight, and old books laid out on long tables. A little girl approached me during the event. She couldn't have been more than 7. "Are you the lady who saved this place?" she asked. I smiled. "I just helped. My mom said you're one of the good Quinns," she whispered. I crouched down. "I'm trying to be." She gave me a purple flower from her pocket. I kept it. I think of her sometimes when I feel doubt creep back in. Because legacy isn't built in courtrooms or boardrooms. It's built in moments like that. Quiet, unnoticed, deeply human. My office at Quinn and Daughters is modest. No grand desk, no titles on the door. Just light through the windows, blueprints on the walls, and a photo on my shelf taken the week after we reclaimed the company. It's of me, my mother, and my grandfather. We're sitting outside the cabin. My grandfather is smiling, eyes bright. My mother leans into me, her hand on mine. I'm in the middle, not sure whether I look like a leader or just someone trying to keep it all together. Maybe that's the same thing. Sometimes I sit alone after hours watching the lights of Charleston flicker beyond the windows. I think about the past, the pain, the lies, but also the love that survived it. Because not all stories of betrayal end in destruction. Some end in rebuilding. Not perfectly, but honestly, that I think is enough.